Abishag is a character who is rarely mentioned in the Bible, but her presence has profound significance in the historical and spiritual context of Israel. She appears at a delicate time in the life of King David, and her role, although discreet, helps to illustrate important aspects of life in the royal court and the traditions of Israel. Let's explore who Abishag was, her role in the story of David and Solomon, and what we can learn from her brief appearance in Scripture. Abishag is a figure mentioned briefly in the Bible in 1 Kings 1 verses 1-4, during the last days of King David's life. She was a young woman from Shunem, a village in northern Israel, and her beauty was remarkable, which led to her being chosen for a very specific task. At that time, David was old and frail, unable to keep warm even with blankets. His advisors suggested bringing a young virgin to care for the king and keep him warm, as was the custom of the time. Abishag was chosen not to be a wife or concubine, but to serve as a special caregiver. She played a vital role in the physical care of the king, providing comfort in his final days. Although the Bible makes it clear that their relationship was not sexual, Abishag's closeness to the king placed her in a unique position in the royal court. Her presence would also become important in political disputes after David's death, when David's son Adonijah attempted to marry her in order to claim legitimacy to the throne. Abishag thus serves as a central figure at a critical moment in the transition of power in Israel. Her role in the life of King David is significant, especially in his final days, as described in 1 Kings 1 verses 1-4. Although Abishag was not David's wife, her role was intimate but not sexual. She was brought in to serve as a special caregiver for David, who was very weak with age. The king could no longer keep himself warm properly, and in keeping with the custom of the time, the choice of a young virgin to assist him was intended to provide physical comfort and care. Abishag fulfilled this role with respect and dedication. In the context of the royal court, it was not uncommon for women to have roles close to the king, not necessarily as wives or concubines, but as caregivers, advisors, or ladies-in-waiting. These women, like Abishag, played roles of great importance, especially for monarchs who, like David, were facing the challenges of old age and health. Abishag's presence in David's final days demonstrates the human side of the king, fragile and in need of care, a contrast to his image as a great warrior and leader throughout his life. Abishag not only cared for the king, but was also by his side at his most vulnerable moments, reflecting the trust that David and his court had in her. The importance of her role goes beyond simple physical care. She embodies the loyalty and dedication that were essential to the king's survival in the final days of his life. Furthermore, her presence also has a symbolic meaning. She stood beside the great king of Israel as he prepared to leave this world, symbolizing the imminent transition of power that was to come with the rise of Solomon. Abishag's role, although discreet, is a key player in the end of David's reign. The political context in which she appears in the Bible was one of great instability and tension in Israel. King David was aging and his reign, which had lasted decades, was coming to an end. With his health failing and his inability to govern effectively, the succession to the throne became an urgent and controversial issue. In this context, Adonijah, one of David's eldest sons, attempted to proclaim himself king, 1 Kings 1 verse 5. He organized a ceremony with the support of important leaders, trying to anticipate his coronation before any official decision was made about the next ruler. This attempt to usurp the throne brought great tension to the court. Although David had promised that his son Solomon, the fruit of his relationship with Bathsheba, would be the next king, Adonijah sought to get ahead and secure power through a political coup. The conflict between Adonijah and Solomon generated an internal struggle for power, and figures close to David, such as the prophet Nathan and Bathsheba, worked to ensure that Solomon would be the rightful heir, as David had promised. Abishag, by being at David's side in his final days, was indirectly involved in this conflict. Her closeness to the king, albeit in a caregiving role, made her a figure of political interest. The fact that Adonijah asked for Abishag as his wife after David's death reveals the symbolic value she carried. In the cultural context of the time, taking as a wife a woman who had been so close to David could be seen as an attempt to claim greater legitimacy to the throne. The struggle for power in David's court, therefore, made the young Abishag an important player, albeit indirectly, in this complex political game. After David's death, Adonijah, who had already tried to proclaim himself king, made an unexpected request. He asked Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, to intercede with the new king so that he could take Abishag as his wife. 1 Kings 2 verses 13 to 17. Although at first glance this might seem to be just a personal request, the cultural and political context of the time reveals that this request had much deeper implications. In the tradition of ancient kingdoms, marrying a woman who had belonged to or been closely associated with a previous king could be seen as a way of asserting or strengthening one's claim to the throne. Abishag, having been David's personal caretaker in his final days, even though she was not his wife, had an important symbolic position. By seeking to marry her, Adonijah was in fact seeking a subtle way to legitimize his aspirations to the throne, trying to gain more influence and political support. Solomon, however, immediately saw through Adonijah's true intention. He understood that Abishag's request for her was not just a desire for marriage, but an attempt to threaten his position as king. To Solomon, the request represented a dangerous political maneuver that could reignite the succession disputes. Thus, Solomon interpreted the request as an act of treason and, to protect his kingdom and prevent future attempts at usurpation, ordered Adonijah's execution. 1 Kings 2 verses 23 to 25. This episode shows how even a seemingly inconspicuous figure like Abishag could be used as a pawn in power games. Although her role was to care for the king in his final days, Abishag's association with David made her a symbol of political legitimacy, something that Adonijah tried to use to his advantage, but which ultimately cost him his life. Abishag, despite her brief mention in the Bible, is a remarkable example of humility and service. She was called to a difficult task, to care for King David in his final days, when he was old and frail. The role Abishag played required patience, dedication, and a spirit of service, as she was tasked with providing physical comfort to the king, without seeking any reward or position of power. Unlike other figures of the time, such as Adonijah, who craved prominence and power, Abishag carried out her mission quietly and honorably. Abishag's humility is even more evident when we consider the political and social context in which she lived. She was at the side of one of the most important kings in the history of Israel, but she never tried to use this proximity for her own benefit. Her role was essentially to care for David, and she did so with dignity, without political ambitions or influence. This contrast between Abishag's simplicity and the boundless ambition of figures like Adonijah highlights the virtue of serving without ulterior motives. Abishag reminds us that, in the biblical narrative, not all great characters are at the center of battles or rule nations. Many, like her, play important roles in history through acts of humility and service. Her example is a valuable lesson for all generations. It is not always the pursuit of power or recognition that defines greatness, but rather the willingness to serve honorably and faithfully, regardless of the circumstances. Abishag's beauty is one of the most highlighted aspects in the Bible, especially in 1 Kings 1 verse 3, where she is described as very beautiful. However, her beauty goes beyond her physical appearance. In biblical tradition, external beauty is often seen as a reflection of internal virtues, such as purity, kindness, and dedication. Abishag exemplifies this concept by being chosen not only for her appearance, but for her willingness to serve King David at a time of extreme vulnerability. The true value of Abishag's beauty lies in her attitude. She accepted a difficult and delicate task, caring for David in his final days, when he was weak and in need of constant care. This position required not only patience and compassion, but also a strength of character that transcended any physical beauty. In serving the king, Abishag displayed a beauty of spirit, demonstrating humility and devotion without ever seeking recognition or high status. In the culture of the time, physical beauty was often associated with moral and spiritual qualities. Abishag not only fulfilled an external role as a caretaker, but also symbolized loyalty and purity amid political tensions and the end of David's reign. She teaches us that true beauty lies in the willingness to serve others with dignity and integrity, without demanding anything in return. Abishag is thus remembered not only for her appearance, but for her character and willingness to stand by a great king at his most vulnerable moments. Her beauty is revealed in her inner strength, reflecting a lesson that true beauty goes beyond the physical, and is found in purity of heart and faithful service. She reminds us that service to others, even in less glamorous tasks, is highly honored by God. Her loyalty and humility are reflections of a life dedicated to the good of others, without demands for rewards or high positions. Her example echoes Jesus' call for his followers to serve one another with the same spirit of love and dedication. Abishag teaches us that greatness lies not in the amount of power we have or the recognition we receive, but in our willingness to faithfully fulfill what God has entrusted to us, no matter how simple the task. Thus, his story is a powerful lesson in devotion, service, and humility, qualities that are central to the Christian faith.